Hello and welcome to U.S. LawShield Live. We are excited to be here with you today. I am Independent Program Attorney Richard Hayes, joined by the brilliant and beautiful Emily Taylor. Good morning, Emily.
Good morning, Richard.
And we are excited to be here with y'all today to talk about why you still need to get a Texas license to carry. We get that question so frequently. We have some questions that just kept rolling in since our last live, and so we had to share it with you. But before we get started, you got to check out uslawshield.com/gettheguide. It's the Texas Constitutional Carry Guide that we help prepare for U.S. LawShield. And just so you know how good it is, the Texas State Law Library reached out to us, asked us if they could, keep it in their library. The author of HB 1927, Representative Matthew Schaefer, he distributed these on the House floor.
Yeah, it is the definitive resource on constitutional carry in the state of Texas. In the legal community and with the legislature. And it's your resource, free.
Yeah, no, it really is where the good stuff is. But we get this question: why should I get a Texas license to carry a handgun? And what are your thoughts, just right out of the gate, Emily?
Yeah, so there are actually lots of reasons, and I without belaboring the point, because 1927's been in effect since September, but if you've looked at it, if you've studied it, it's messy and it's quirky, and there are lots of pitfalls for people who are constitutional carriers, lots of benefits to being a license holder. So we are taking live questions. Make sure to submit your questions live, and we've got our list here, and I think we can jump in.
Yeah, I'll kick us off. So these are the questions that we've received previously leading up to this Facebook Live. We're getting live questions fed to us, so if you have questions, make sure to put those in the comments section. Make sure to share this video with somebody who needs to get a license to carry, and we'll be love to answer these live. So the first things first, what is a Texas LTC?
Yeah, so we have, of course, going back to the origins in the 1990s, when the only way you could carry a gun in public under the Texas Penal Code, of course, not in your castles, but in public, was through what was then a CHL, a concealed handgun license, that still exists even after constitutional carry in the form of a license to carry. And it's essentially your government permission to be exempted from 4602, except now we have several exemptions from Texas Penal Code 4602, which is what says you could not carry a handgun in public. One now is that you have your license, your designated good guy badge, I think. The other is that you qualify for Texas constitutional carry, which is a little bit more confusing than it sounds. It's not buy a gun you can carry. So you have that license. You absolutely know you're qualified. You've got to take your shooting portion of your course. You've got to take your written portion of your course, which you can now do online as well through authorized providers. And ultimately, you apply to the state. You are issued that license, once you pay your $40 fee to the government.
Yeah, and that's the question that I get a lot is, hey, y'all have Texas constitutional carry now. Why the heck would I get a Texas license to carry a handgun? And there's a handful of reasons, but just off the top of my head, you just have more rights as a license holder. So someone who wants to carry a handgun, generally in public, they have to be carrying under the authority of either their license to carry a handgun or Texas constitutional carry, and the two things are not equal. There's some really, really important differences. And so let's go to one of the first questions we got. Can I carry wherever I want with an LTC?
Yeah, well, the answer is still no. There are still places that are off limits. But the important part is you can carry more places with an LTC than you can without. Not just by statute, right? What's actually prohibited to constitutional carriers, and we can talk through those. But I think we can start by just speaking practically. People are forbidding constitutional carriers where they're not forbidding LTC holders. And when I see people, I'm talking about private property owners who are posting their trespassing notice, right? So We've got two different sets of signs. We've got 30-6, 30-7. Those are your license to carry signs. 30-6, you're not allowed to conceal carry in this establishment. 30-7, you're not allowed to open carry in this establishment. But when we talk to property owners who are calling in and inquiring about this, they don't want to post those signs. They want to post the no constitutional carry signs. You want to talk about those and why they're so much more prevalent?
Yes. And so we have different standards of notice. And so, we have our statutorily prohibited places under Texas Penal Code 4603. That applies to constitutional carriers and license holders alike. And then there's a few nuances, and we're going to get into those. But when we're talking about carrying out generally in public, like Emily said, we have our trespass notice for license holders, which are really crystal clear. We know exactly what those look like. But what we're hearing, out in the field is, a business owners, they like license to carry holders. They don't want to exclude license to carry holders, but they want to exclude people carrying under the authority of Texas constitutional carry with a Texas Penal Code 30-5 notice. And what makes this so unique is it looks a lot like 30-6 and 30-7, but there's a few twists. Under 30-6 and 30-7, we have some statutory requirements: English, Spanish, block letters, 1-inch, contrasting colors, prominently or conspicuously displayed at the entrance of a building.
And really specific statutorily prescribed language, right?
Exactly right. And with our 30-5 notice, it could be anything. It could be a gunbuster sign. It could say no weapons. It could say no firearms. Your imagination can go wild.
Homemade signs.
Yeah.
I mean, Sharpie on a 8x10 piece of paper that says no weapons. I mean, that it could be literally anything.
And so the standard for, our constitutional carriers is so much lower, and we see these signs going up everywhere that our people who are carrying under the authority of a license to carry, they get to ignore 30-5 notice. And so, I mean, that's a huge advantage that I think a lot of people are talking about and starting to figure out.
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, it's just, and you see it everywhere now, you are just going to see more guns with a red line through it, the gunbuster signs, more no weapons than you are 30-6, 30-7. You just, when it comes to just living your life, right? We're not talking about schools, courthouses, things like that, but just like going to the gas station, going to the grocery store, going to the shopping mall, you are just going to be able to carry with that LTC far more frequently than you can carry with the constitutional carry.
And this is, a real surface level discussion. If you really want to get into the meat and potatoes of this, you have to go to uslawshield.com/get-the-guide. Explains all the prohibited places under 4603 and all of these different kind of trespass signs that constitutional carriers and license carriers need to be aware of,
And there's a detailed carry chart in the guide, so you can see with my license versus without, where do I get to carry? So it is, it's very clear.
And that kind of brings us to the next question that we get a lot, which is about reciprocity. And let's say I'm carrying under the authority of Texas constitutional carry. Do those rights translate when I'm in another state, Em?
Yeah, so they do not, right? So even though in Texas we have our constitutional carry rights here, assuming you qualify for constitutional carry, once you hit, the state boundary and you go into another state, if that state doesn't have a constitutional carry law that you qualify for, right? Because everyone's qualifications are a little bit different. Not just that, there are few states, but they still exist, that require that you be a resident of that state to engage in constitutional carry. You're stuck, right? You need that LTC in order to engage in the reciprocal agreement to be able to carry in most states throughout the country. And, I think also most states that do have constitutional carry do a little bit of what we do here in Texas, which is give the license holders some more rights and some more places they're allowed to carry. I think you're just safer if you travel with that license. It is incredibly important. And I think while we're on that topic, traveling in airports is something that's also going to be affected by whether or not you have an LTC or are carrying under constitutional carry. Do you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, because, the travel season is upon us, and a lot of people are flying with their firearms. And here's where, this is a cool perk of being a license to carry holder, especially when things are very frantic right now. But we have extra rights as license holders. So, for example, I'm going to give kind of two different scenarios here. We have somebody who frantically packs their bag and maybe they carry a handgun in it from time to time, and they don't properly check it before, walking on to or attempting to enter TSA security. And there's two different outcomes for a person who's carrying under the authority of Texas constitutional carry and a person carrying with a license to carry. And that's because as a license holder, we get some extra affirmative defenses. And essentially, if you accidentally carry into the secured portion of an airport, if you have a license to carry, it's a bar to arrest. They have to allow you to return your handgun back to your vehicle and secure it, and hopefully you make your flight. And you're not getting charged with an unlawfully carrying of a weapon, a very serious crime. You're still going to get hit with a TSA fine. The federal government, our license to carry is a state issued document. It doesn't really confer any rights to us on the federal level. So you're still going to get hit with a TSA fine, but you make your flight.
Yeah, and just so you know how frequently this happens, on the emergency hotline of all of the Texas members we have, I'd say we get that call. I accidentally carried through TSA security once a week.
Yeah, pretty frequently.
It happens to a lot of people. You think it's never going to happen to you. as soon as you say that, it'll happen to you, right?
Yes.
You've tempted fate. So it really, and it is, I mean, it's a felony crime if you don't have a license to carry. So do you want to risk a felony because you were panicked trying to get your kids ready to fly for Christmas? Or do you want to at least know you can return that weapon to your car, still make your flight,
Yeah.
and not have a criminal record?
Yeah, going back to our example for our Texas constitutional carrier, their outcome is completely different.
Yes.
They are not barred from getting arrested. They are not barred from getting charged with a crime. And instead of catching your flight, you can imagine you're getting you're making a trip to a jail probably for unlawfully carrying a weapon. So the outcomes are very, very different for our license holder and for our constitutional carrier. Now, the next question that I have, and this is kind of just a housekeeping matter because this comes up a lot, is if you had a license to carry, a lot of people are worried, hey, have I lost rights or things changed? And if you had a license to carry, and if you're carrying the same way you did prior to September 1st, you're going to be just fine. Your rights as a license holder expanded. They didn't contract. And so I don't want people to worry about that too much. But another kind of follow-up question we get to that is, has the license to carry requirements changed? And what do you explain to people about that, Em?
Yeah, I mean, we have not changed the requirements to get a license to carry. There was talk, and I wish they would do this, and I hope they'll do it next session. There was talk about making it free to get a license to carry. There were several proposed bills, even a proposed amendment to constitutional carry that would have made your LTC free. No, the only thing that we changed in the requirements that I can recall is we let some more 18 to 21-year-olds get licenses to carry. And so that's another benefit because, of course, constitutional carry starts at age 21, whereas there are exceptions where between the ages of 18 and 20, you can get a license to carry, you can become a carrier. Those exceptions I know of are being an active member of the military or honorably discharged from the military, or being a current victim currently under a protective order for a domestic violence offense.
Yeah.
So, I mean, those are both incredibly important, right? We want to give our military members who are younger people, I mean, they're defending our country. They should have the right to carry. We want to give it to them. And people who, I mean, you're fleeing an abusive situation, that's when you're most likely to be hurt or killed. You need the ability to defend yourself. Constitutional carry doesn't give it to you.
Yeah. And before we get too far down the road, we got a live question. Lisa asks, if I have an LTC and I forget a pocket knife in my carry-on luggage, will I have that same protection? And the answer, it's a little bit mixed because you have there's really only one classification of knife that is regulated under Texas law, and that's our location restricted knives with a blade length greater than 5.5 inches. So if it's a small pocket knife, maybe attached to a keychain, you're not going to have that problem. If you're carrying like a large knife, well, bad news, that protection does not extend to location restricted knives. That protection only extends to handguns, and that's because a license to carry really is a handgun license. That's the only type of, people hate it, but that's the only type of weapon that's covered under a Texas license to carry handgun. It doesn't give you any extra rights with a location restricted knife, for example. Great question, Lisa.
Yeah. And now that being said, Lisa, the good news is that the TSA statutes, I mean, the ones that are really serious, and we're talking not about Texas law now, which is what Richard was talking about, but the TSA, they are far more concerned about handguns than they are about other weapons like that. Chances that they just take a knife away from you and send you on your way without contacting local law enforcement, without even putting you on the list to, see if there's a fine associated with whatever weapon you happen to have, stun guns, things like that. I'm sure there are fines associated, even though I can't come up with it right now. Chances are much, much lower. I think that they enjoy finding the firearms a lot more.
Yeah, someone has told me this. I haven't been able to confirm it, that the TSA agents get some kind of bounty for discovering weapons.
I've heard that too.
But so, I don't know the answer. So we talk about having more rights, places that you can carry with a license to carry that you maybe not be allowed to carry with under the authority of Texas constitutional carry. One of the other huge benefits I like to tell people about is kind of the fast lane for firearms transactions. And so this was really important last year during the beginning of the pandemic. And what did you see happening out in the field?
Oh, gosh. So what we saw was NICS giving a 30-day plus turnaround time on getting those background checks to gun stores. And I mean, we even had gun stores call us and say, do I have to abide by this? Can I still sell someone the weapon? And, our advice was, the statute, the regulations are unchanged, right? I mean, if you don't get that if you don't get that denial within your 3 business days, you can still sell the weapon. But what we found was that the gun stores were so hesitant, and they said, I understand I can legally sell it. I'm going to wait until I get that background check. And so people were waiting 30 days or more in order to legally purchase a firearm from an FFL dealer. With your LTC, you don't have to worry because you're bypassing the background check. I mean, that's one of the great things about Texas LTCs. Not every state, actually, their license does not always let you bypass the background check, but Texas does.
Yeah.
And it's just, I mean, at any moment, and I think that, we can agree, the federal government would like to regulate firearms more than they're able to right now. There's a little bit of kind of our general Capitol Hill stickiness going on. And I think that it would not be, I wouldn't be surprised to see a slowdown of the NICS system as a way to sort of backdoor regulate firearms here in the next couple of years. And so you don't want to, you want to be able to say, here's my license, sell me a gun today, instead of, oh, well, the ATF is messing with the NICS system again, the FBI is messing around, and so I'm going to have to wait 2 months to get a firearm.
Yeah, there's really, when we talk about the gun grabbers, it's a three-pronged attack. Who can possess firearms, what firearms we can possess, and where we can possess them. And when we see them messing and tinkering with the database, that's the who can possess. They're kind of backdoor modifying that. And as Emily said, not every license meets the qualifications to be a substitute for the National Instant Criminal Check System. Texas does. And so here, I'll give you another example. We have our person in mid-pandemic when the NICS system is getting crushed. First-time gun owner, worried. What do I do? They go to the gun store and they get delayed. Even, let's say they have no criminal history. They would get delayed, and especially the big box stores. They just make it a company policy. We're not going to sell you a gun unless we get a proceed. But our LTC holders, they put down that LTC, they run the number, make sure it's still valid, and they proceed. I mean, that transaction takes 5 minutes.
And here's what's going to make this all worse is that today, November 30th, there is right now a case being tried in regards to the Sutherland Springs shooting, because the Air Force did not report his violation. So he was sold a weapon, and there are people actually suing the federal government right now, attempting to hold them liable monetarily for that mess up. And I mean, you better believe that if the government has to pay out for that sort of thing, that they are going to, I mean, I can't imagine the system doesn't slow down at that point, because the government doesn't want to pay for a bureaucrat who forgot to enter something into a database. And so things are going to get a lot worse if that liability holds.
Yeah. We got an awesome question from David. I'm going to interject here. So could it be more difficult for an attorney to defend a constitutional carry individual involved in, let's say, a self-defense, critical defense incident, as opposed to someone who has a Texas license to carry? We were just talking about this.
We were just talking about this.
Yeah, good question, David.
The last murder case I tried, it was wonderful to get up there and to tell, particularly my jury panel, right? I mean, there's 80 people, you're trying to get a good, fair jury, and most of them aren't gun people. I mean, that's just what you're going to get when you get a random selection. And they love to hear the term licensed gun owner, licensed gun owner. It holds so much prestige in the mind of these people who aren't necessarily gun people. They have this idea that you did the right thing, you jumped through the hoops, you're fully vetted, you know what you're doing, and you are, I mean, it's like, it is, I think, night and day with the jury, even though we know, hey, you're carrying legally under constitutional carrier, you're a legal carrier.
Yeah, you have no criminal history.
Right. I mean, there's no issue there. But if I'm your lawyer and I'm having to defend your Self-Defense Act, I want to look at those jurors in the eye and I want to say, he did everything he can to be safe. He is a licensed carrier. He knew what he was. I mean, it can make the difference.
Yeah. And I think that transitions well into a question that we received previously about are there any penalties, and this probably goes back to our prohibited locations, penalties that maybe, or locations that would apply to constitutional carriers that, don't apply to license holders? And there's really, I think, one really, really important one, which is, there's three. Well, but the big one that scares me to death is open meetings.
Sure. Yeah. Let's talk about that. Then we'll talk through bars.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so open meetings, and I think this was maybe a mistake by the legislature.
Oh, I think so.
Because, let's talk prior to September 1st. You didn't have a license to carry. You'd go carry generally out in public. That's a Class A misdemeanor, unlawfully carrying a weapon. That's what the law used to be. And let's say you decided to carry into an open meeting of a governmental entity. You have your water district or your city council, and it's not in an otherwise prohibited place. Let's say it's its own standalone building for purposes of our hypothetical. That would be a Class A misdemeanor. Still very serious crime. Nobody wants to get charged with the crime. But
Well, and that's if you did not have a license.
Correct.
So we'll just differentiate really quickly here.
Correct.
If you had an LTC before September 1st, you could carry unless they posted a 30-06 sign
Exactly
or 30-07, which they were allowed to do to prohibit licensed carriers.
Exactly right. And so prior to September 1st, that's our constitutional carrier license holder, if they were provided notice, they'd be excluded. Well, when they moved things around and reorganized the law, they ended up making open meetings a third-degree felony. Now, licensed carry holders can no longer be excluded from open meetings of governmental entities so long as the meeting is taking place in a otherwise not prohibited place. So let's say you had an open meeting in a school, that would still be off limits. Or if it was in a courtroom, that would still be off limits. But if you had an open meeting taking place, let's say in a standalone city council meeting or a standalone, your water district has
City Hall.
City Hall, exactly right. Your license holder can carry into that location and they can't be excluded. Compare that to our constitutional carrier. If they carry in there, it's a third-degree felony, punishable by up to 10 years in the penitentiary, up to a $10,000 fine. That's, a pretty serious difference.
Well, can you imagine being a constitutional carrier, feeling like, oh, I have the ability, I can generally carry into City Hall.
Right.
I know that. I know I'm allowed to carry into City Hall, but you decide to go make your voice heard at the city council meeting. You're carrying, you've committed a felony.
Right.
And, I cannot imagine, that's one of those things where it's not like I've committed to memory that this place is off locations. The place isn't off limits, right? It's not an off limits location. It is in that moment you've committed a felony versus if you have a license, you're good to go.
Yeah. And then circling back around to what you mentioned earlier, bars, another important place where license holders get a huge leg up here. And this is a sign that everybody needs to commit to memory. It's the 51% red 51% sign. And you see these posted at bars, places that make most of their money from the sale of alcohol for on-premises consumption, right? And what the law said prior to September 1st is, hey, you know what? If we don't effectively post this sign, Emily had a client who had to raise this defense.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, his case was dismissed because the bar didn't effectively post the sign. Yeah.
But if you had this sign, it wasn't effectively posted, then license holders, you have a defense, and they've actually improved that and made it a non-applicability. So it's even more powerful for license holders.
Yeah.
Here's the part that is not so great for Texas constitutional carriers. They have to effectively become mind readers. Can you explain that?
Yes. So while license holders, in order to be convicted of this felony or to be criminally liable, right? So again, we're still talking about 10 years in prison or a $10,000 fine. The sign has to be conspicuously posted. So you have warning. You see that 51% sign, you're a license holder, turn around, put it in the car, But if if they haven't posted the sign, or if, let's say, they've posted it somewhere where it is unseeable, right? Behind blacked out glass. That's what happened in my case with my client. Back by the bathrooms, and they've stapled something else over it. You don't worry about it. You are not criminally liable because that is not conspicuously posted. You did not get notice. Constitutional carriers have no such benefit. So what we have is a state of the world in which, the difference between they sell 49% of their, receipts by on-site consumption alcohol and 51%. How are you supposed to know that if you're a constitutional carrier, if they don't post a sign? And yet, if they sell 51% of their gross receipts by the on-site consumption of alcohol and you're a constitutional carrier and they haven't posted a sign, you have committed a felony the second you walk in that door. You have no defense, which is horrifying because bars, 51%, they don't always look like bars. They can have tables, they can sell food. We're not talking about nightclubs here. We're talking about things that can look just like restaurants, which constitutional carriers are allowed to carry into.
Right. I heard an example. It was a brew pub that was a hotel. They were staying at a hotel.
Oh, yeah, that was my client too.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yep.
Where, they were staying at a brew pub that was also a hotel, and the downstairs or portion of the building was a 51% location. There's a lot of different laws.
The whole hotel is a 51% location.
Yeah, the premises. I guess that is a good point.
It is a brewery/hotel, and apparently they make way more money from the beer than they do from the hotel. And he carried in, and yes, we were sweating out a felony there for a little while. If you ever go to New Braunfels, just keep your eye out for this brewery/hotel and be very careful.
Yes. And that's a good reminder. So the 51% sign, if you're looking for what does this look like, it's in the guide, uslawshield.com/get-the-guide. Learn what all these signs look like. It's very, very important. The last question that we're getting a lot that was kind of sent to us beforehand is, how do I get a license to carry? And what I think is the best, this is more, my personal experience as opposed to being a lawyer. I tell everybody to go find their mom and pop gun range.
Yes.
Who is, you want to be part of that 2A community where you live. Find a local gun store, find a range, find somebody that you can talk to regularly about these things. They offer classes. I guarantee you they offer classes.
Yes.
And what do you tell people when they're saying, hey, how do I get my LTC? Where do you tell them to start?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Your local gun groups on Facebook, a great place to start. You're going to see the people who offer classes. And yes, support these local LTC instructors. I mean, they're in the front lines of helping us fight for our Second Amendment rights. Give them your business, give them your revenue, and they are going to make the process so easy for you. And then you're going to know exactly how to apply to the state. And it's just, I have nothing really to add except your local business is the best thing you can do.
Yeah, and what I was thinking about this the other day, we had such a long dormant period with the Second Amendment because we had, the Constitution. It's pretty straightforward. Keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed. And there wasn't, a whole lot of infringement going on. And so, the 2A community wasn't very strong for a very long period of time. And I'm worried, and I don't want this to happen, that with Texas constitutional carry, that the 2A community doesn't continue that fight, doesn't continue to get the training, doesn't continue to support the infrastructure that's really needed to push back on gun grabbers. And so, we don't want the Second Amendment to just become dormant and forgotten. And we need people to continue to fight that fight. And I think that's a great way to do it.
Yeah. And, we've got a couple minutes left. This is something that you should know about having an LTC versus not. It's a weird one, but it's one of the things we like talking about the most because it is so weird. This is a crime that it doesn't exist for LTC holders anymore, which is carrying while intoxicated. So believe it or not, and I know that the DPS, they teach zero tolerance, can't carry while you're drinking alcohol. That's actually not the law. So the problem that people worry about is I'm carrying my firearm. I've had one glass of wine with dinner or one beer. An officer sees me, pulls me over, smells alcohol in my breath. I'm going to be charged with unlawful carry because I'm carrying my weapon and I'm intoxicated, which they don't have to take your blood. They don't have to prove 0.08 or greater. They just have to smell alcohol and then say, oh, well, I think his mental or physical faculties were compromised. We're by the substance. And so with constitutional carry, believe it or not, it is no longer a crime to carry while intoxicated. And I'm not advocating that you do that.
No, firearms and alcohol don't mix.
But at the same time, if you're a carrier and you carry consistently and you want to go have that one beer or that one glass of wine with dinner, you don't have to worry about it anymore.
Yeah.
And constitutional carriers still do.
Yeah, you must have read James' mind because James asked, what about alcohol consumption while having an LTC? And so,
Thank you, James.
Yes, James, you shot it right into Emily's head. So the important thing to think about, most of our intoxication crimes are in Chapter 49 of our Texas Penal Code, and that's where we get all those great definitions that you listed out, James, about 0.08, losing the loss of normal use of mental or physical faculties. We don't have the same definitions when it comes to, because the carrying while intoxicated provision lives in, Chapter 46 with all the other, firearms and weapons-related crimes. And so it is a lower standard, but the good news is it's still the standard of intoxicated. We just don't have that same definition, right? But what's really fascinating, and to crystallize what Emily was saying, was, that crime of carrying while intoxicated, that lives in Texas Penal Code 4602. 4602 does not apply to license holders carrying under the authority of their license to carry. So you got to have possession of your license, and you're carrying that handgun if you're openly carrying, it has to be in a holster or concealed. So if you're following all your rules as a license holder, that provision of 4602 doesn't apply to you. So, if you had your one beer or your one glass of wine and you weren't intoxicated, and a police officer wanted to, really allege, I smell alcohol, then you really have some added protection as a license holder.
And I know that it sounds far-fetched, like, oh, he's going to pop me for one beer, one glass of wine. In our practice, and I think you'll agree with me here, I have never seen police conduct a blood or a breath test for carrying while intoxicated. Never, not once.
Yeah.
And so it is all about the officer's subjective opinion about whether or not your faculties are compromised. And, if I mean, on any given day, I'm mixing my words up so much. Lord knows what an officer would think about me when I'm dead sober. So, I mean, it really is. I mean, it's scary. I think it should scare people.
Yes. Well, I think that kind of is a good stopping point. We have so many questions rolling in that, we don't have time to get to all of them, but keep your questions coming because we're going to be doing a lot more of these Facebook Lives, and we'd love to answer your questions. So keep them coming in the comment section. Share this video. Tell your friends, hey, you got a question? Post it in the chat under this video, and we'd love to get to it in a future video. And, this was just the surface, why you should get a license to carry. We got reciprocity, fast lane for firearms transactions. You have more places. You have more rights that you can carry.
So many more places you can carry. Airports, bars, all the places you're not going to get arrested if you have a license to carry and you mess up, know.
And the best way to understand it is understand Texas constitutional carry, understand the license to carry. Go to uslawshield.com/get the guide. Get the Texas constitutional carry guide. I mean, there is so much stinking information in this thing. And I mean, on behalf of myself, Emily, we really enjoyed hanging out with y'all. Hope you enjoyed this presentation. And until next time, we'll talk to you then.
And go get that license.
Yeah.